Oh, hi, I'm Connor Arthur. I'm a student at Lake Washington High School, and I want to become a history major. And today I'm going to be delivering to you a presentation about the early history of Germany from 500 BC to 1242 AD.
That's when I lived. I'm from Germany.
Wow.
That's when I lived.
So we need to start talking about the ethnogenesis of the German people. So that means the origin of their ethnicity, like where the tribes that make up their nation. Because so around the year 500, Germanic tribes were the main ethnicity in Central Europe. So Central Europe pretty much extends from here to here.
I don't know if everybody can see that.
Oh well, they're on the map there,
Maybe
and then also
stand on the other side.
on the other. I can't do that. If I do that, then it won't.
And step back and move that chair. So you're not-
I'll move the chair. All right, there we go. Damn thing. And then also they extended north into the Scandinavian peninsula, and that's where all of the Scandinavian countries, they're also of a Germanic ancestry. So there were like three principal groups. There was the West Germanic, which was everything in modern day Germany plus the Netherlands and like half of Belgium. And then the North Germanic, which are the Norse. And then also the East Germanic, which are like the Goths and the other groups that they kind of went away because of the Slavic migration, kind of came in and displaced them and forced them to migrate to the west.
Where did they come from before 500?
We don't really have a good answer for that. It's so far back in
I assume they
history.
came from Africa.
Well, yes, human beings migrated out of Africa and all of that, but basically, when we start hearing most about the early Germanic people, it's from the Romans who were having conflict with them. So the Germanic tribes fought the Romans, but also their neighbors to the west, the Gauls, who would become French people later on. And they also fought each other because they were a bunch of not organized tribes. They weren't united, so they didn't have, there was quite a bit of conflict between them. Which is kind of a theme that you're going to see throughout the history of Germany, is Germans fighting each other as much as they fight anyone else.
Would there be any written history left?
Not from the Germans. They didn't have a written language, or writing was not commonly among them. So
Other.
everything that we know about them is from the Romans who were writing about them. So the Roman Empire, the frontier of the Roman Empire was the Rhine River. So basically everything east of the Rhine was seen as the domain of the barbarians, of the Germanic tribes, who the Romans saw as uncivilized and, just their barbaric enemies, which they weren't very friendly to the Romans, so you could probably see why the Romans didn't like them very much. But the Roman Empire did have a little bit of the territory west of the Rhine that was populated by Germans, and they became Romanized. They integrated into Roman civilization. But basically, one of the biggest events that happens in this particular time period is Julius Caesar's expedition into Germania. And he crossed over the Rhine by building a bridge out of trees that he cut down. Well, he had his army do this, he didn't do it all himself. But they built a bridge out of trees that he cut down, and it was quite a feat of engineering. And they built this massive bridge across the Rhine, which is it was more than half a mile wide. And then, when they had crossed over that bridge, they destroyed it to ensure that the Germans couldn't use it to get over the river and attack the Romans. So he builds the bridge, and then he immediately destroys it once his army has crossed over. And then I think they had to build another one to get back.
Yeah, okay.
So during Julius Caesar's expedition into Germania, it wasn't very successful. It was just kind of a thing that happened that made Julius Caesar very famous back in Rome. But he did manage to conquer anything west of the Rhine that was very significant, or really, it was just an adventure. And I think the guys back in Rome, they just wanted to get rid of Caesar for a little bit. This is before Caesar had taken over Rome and made it into the Roman Empire. And then also another Roman expedition, there was a very devastating battle for the Romans at a place called the Teutoburg Forest. And the Roman army was devastated when they were ambushed in the middle of the forest by the Germans. And the Romans lost several of their very prized Roman eagles that they carried with them as the symbol of the legions, and the Germans had captured them. And this got some of the Roman generals in charge of that battle in very much trouble. As you can see, there were not very good relations between the Germans and the Romans already.
Do you know which tribe that was?
Well, it was the Teutons, who were one of the main Germanic tribes that lived close to the Rhine. So they're one of the ones that the Romans had the most contact with. So now we have to address the role of the Germanic tribes in the fall of the Roman Empire. So the Huns invaded Europe in the 300s, coming in from the steppes of Eurasia. And due to the Hunnic invasion, a lot of the Germanic tribes had to migrate west and south in order to flee from the Hunnic army. So this forced them to cross over the border with the Roman Empire and invade it. So this caused even more conflict and friction between the Romans and the Germans, because now the Germans were on the offensive against the Romans. And soon, the Germanic tribe called the Vandals, which is, that's why we call people who destroy things Vandals. They invaded the city of Rome, and they destroyed quite a bit of things, and burned down a lot of buildings and looted things. And their king, the king of the Vandals, his name was Odoacer. And he proclaimed himself the king of Italy after destroying the Roman Empire of the West, which ended the Western Roman Empire. This was in 476. The Western Roman Empire wouldn't be revived until 800, which we're going to talk about pretty soon. So, and the former territories of the Roman Empire of the West were replaced by the Germanic kingdoms. So, like Odoacer took over Italy. And then the Franks, who are another Germanic tribe, created the Frankish kingdom, which would later evolve into France. And then after Charlemagne dies, the western half will be split off, and that will become Germany. Or, the earliest thing you could call Germany.
Do you have a sense of the population? How many people lived in these?
There isn't, they didn't take a census. I have no idea how many people would have lived in Germania at this time, but probably wasn't very populated. It was probably very sparsely populated, and it was just made up of a bunch of rural tribes. There wasn't really any cities.
Connor, is there no record of how many soldiers they had
They
in their
didn't
battles?
take records. They didn't really have writing.
How many were in Rome at that time?
How many were in Rome? Had a population of almost 1 million. So it was quite the large city for the time, the population of the world is probably only a couple 100 million,
So was the German people about the same as the Roman, or there was a lot more Roman people?
There were quite a few more Romans, but the Germans were an overwhelming force. The Romans were too busy being attacked by the Huns, being attacked by the Germans. The Romans were under siege on all sides, basically, at this time. So it was not good, and the Roman Empire was also running out of money. Well, the Western Roman Empire, because when the Roman Empire had been split in half, they split it in half because it was becoming too big to govern. The eastern half got all of the provinces that were profitable and made the Roman Empire a lot of money. The West got stuck with all of the rural provinces that didn't make money. So basically, the Roman Empire of the West was very broke and couldn't pay for their military very well, so they didn't have quite the amount of forces that would have been needed to resist.
What time frame? What year?
This is around the 400s AD.
80.
Oh, 80.
Yeah, 500s AD.
So you jump 900 years forward. We need to make sure we understand.
Okay.
Sure.
Yes, the Romans began encountering Germans around the 300s BC, but because they had sporadic and not constant contact with them because of the Rhine River being in the way, It was quite a bit of time where it just wasn't really a thing. What?
Where's the Rhine on that?
The Rhine is this river right here.
Oh,
I believe.
So what you didn't cover, there's the entire rise and fall of the Roman Empire, you just
Yes, well, I already had covered that. I can't do the Roman Empire.
understood, just make sure.
We've already tried that in one of my other presentations.
I missed that though.
So there is, yes, so the German tribes, they each all had a king who was in charge of them. And because of the Roman Empire falling away, all of these different Germanic kingdoms had risen up to replace it. So the Visigoths, who were originally an East Germanic group, had migrated to the west into Spain, and then also the western part of France here. And they set up a kingdom called the Kingdom of the Visigoths. And they were actually one of the first groups to convert to Christianity. However, they converted to Arian Christianity, which is a version that says it's different from Nicene Christianity. Nicene Christianity says that Jesus is the Son of God and he wasn't made by God, and he was always existing, and then God sent him down to earth. And then Arian Christianity says that God created Jesus just out of nothing one day. It was a theological difference that had a lot of controversy at the time. So the Visigoths did not like other groups who had converted to Nicene Christianity. Also the pagans too. There were Germanic groups of the north who were still pagan. They hadn't converted to Christianity. Basically, the Vandals also are another Germanic group. They're also an East Germanic group that had migrated west. And they actually went to Africa. They crossed the Mediterranean on boats, and they invaded the Roman North Africa. And the reason why they did that is because at this time, North Africa was actually a fertile growing region. The climate hadn't shifted, which made it into a desert. So they went there because there was good farmland, and they used it. And also they thought that it would be extra safe from the Huns being across the Mediterranean. They took over Roman North Africa for a little bit. But now we need to talk about the most important of the Germanic kingdoms, which is the Frankish one. And as you can see, there's a nice little expanding map here that shows how big it got, which was quite big. So they were the predominant West Germanic tribe in this area. They were all kind of considered to be Frankish in this area. And they married into and assimilated with the Romano Britons, which had fled from Brittany, or they got. So England at this time, there was a Germanic group called the Saxons who were going to England, and they made the Anglo-Saxons. And some of the Britons had fled and gone to France. Also there was the Gauls, and the Gauls had married in with the Franks, making Frankish people, or French people. So their kingdom was also one of the first ones to convert to Christianity in 508. So this was only a couple decades after the fall of the Roman Empire. And also their first Christian king, his name was Clovis I. He made Paris the capital of France, which it still is today. So I guess that's pretty important. But at that time, Paris was just kind of a medium-sized town. It wasn't the huge metropolis, obviously.
Why did they choose Paris?
Mostly because it was the biggest town in France at that time. And also it was one that had been founded by Frankish people and not an earlier Roman settlement.
Location on the river.
It's also on a river too. Yeah.
Could you repeat the year that Paris was created?
508.
Thank you.
Yes. So Charlemagne, the son of the Frankish king Pepin the Short, so this is a little bit further after many kings, but Charlemagne comes along, and he waged war against the Saxons, who were a group that still lived over there, so the Saxons who hadn't migrated to England, because they were still pagan. And Charlemagne incorporated a lot of the East Germanic territories, like as you can see the expansion of the realm here around the 700s here. That's Charlemagne expanding the empire all the way into the east. And then by 800, it would be remade into the Western Roman Empire again. So, on Christmas Day 800, the Pope invited Charlemagne, or Charles the Great, to be crowned as the Roman Emperor of the West, which revived the Roman Empire. Well, at least it did legally. It didn't rebuild the Roman Empire the way it was in the 400s when it had fallen, but it didn't really change things immediately. But it changed the idea of the West for centuries after, because the Roman Empire was more of a spiritual community than a state, really. They redefined the Roman Empire as being a state that you became a citizen of if you were baptized as a Christian. Yeah. And then here's a picture, well, made quite a bit after the events, but this is Charlemagne being crowned by Pope Leo III as Emperor of the West, and this is actually an engraving that was made in the 1880s. So they were using their imagination a little bit when they made this one. There isn't really any contemporary illustrations of those events. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about the man himself. This is also a non-contemporaneous illustration. This one, it was made in the 1500s. Anyway, so he was born the year 748 in the Duchy of Austrasia, which is part of France now. He was the son of the king Pepin the Short, because he was short. And his mother tongue was probably not French, but it was probably an earlier form of Old High German. So there kind of is an argument between France and Germany about what was Charlemagne's nationality. Who was he more French or was he more German? And I think that the best answer is that he was both, because neither of them really existed at the time.
He was a Frank, right?
Yes, Franks were a Germanic people. The common people in the Frankish realm spoke basically early French, because it was the language that had been left over from the Romans. The Latin of the Vulgar Latin left over from Roman times, and then the ruling class was the Germanic warrior elite, which Charlemagne was a part of. So they spoke a German language and not a Latin one like French.
Charlemagne's a title, right? His name was Charles.
Yeah, his name was Charles, but Le Main is French. It means that he's great. He's Charles the Great. So by the time of his accession, when he took over the kingdom, he was ruling jointly with his brother Carloman. But Carloman died of disease, I think. So then Charles took over the kingdom as the king totally. And he really enjoyed expanding his kingdom by war. He fought the Saxons, and then also a Germanic group in Italy called the Lombards. And he absorbed Italy and Saxony into the Roman, well, not the Roman, it wasn't the Roman Empire yet, it was into the Frankish kingdom. And also he attempted to invade Spain, which was under the occupation of the Muslims at that time, but it was not very successful. He was ambushed by the Basques at a place called Roncesvalles Pass, which it was quite a devastating battle for the Frankish army. So he ultimately decided to not continue with his invasion of Spain. But he actually had one of his daughters marry the son of the Greek empress Irene. But this did not really succeed in uniting the Eastern Roman Empire with the Frankish kingdom. It just didn't really go anywhere. So his marriage alliance didn't really work out. And he was crowned by Pope Leo III as the Roman Emperor of the West, which resurrected the empire. However, the Greeks didn't like this because they said, no, we're the real Roman Empire, stop pretending.
So the Eastern Roman Empire was
Yes,
based out
the
of-
Byzantine Empire was based in Greece and the Middle East area. So they didn't like somebody else trying to claim the title of the Roman Emperor. They said there's only one Roman Emperor. Well, I'd like to disagree. They split the empire in half, so it would be more easily governed. So I think there's room for 2 emperors. Anyway, he also did, he made the capital of the Holy Roman Empire at Aachen, which is still inside Germany today. He was also famous for his wars against the Danes, because the Danes, he didn't like them either because they were pagan. However, he met his end by lung inflammation on the 28th of January, 814, which he...
Pneumonia?
No, the lining of his lungs got inflamed, which is
Maybe pneumonia.
unfortunate. It was probably pneumonia. Anyway, but he did quite a bit. He lived a very long time for his time, and got quite a bit accomplished. You know, he remade the Roman Empire, which is something that the Frankish kings had actually been wanting to do for many years.
How old was he, Con?
Well, I don't know. He was born in 748 and he died in 814. I pull out a calculator and do it, but
Okay, yeah.
he's like in his
76.
14 and 50 to 60.
76. Oh wow, he was 76 years old when he passed.
Wow, that's old for them.
So here's his throne, which is in Aachen Cathedral.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's where he would have sat all day, I guess. I don't know if he's really spent a lot of time there, but that is where he sat down after he got coronated, after he got his crown put on. And you can still go and look at it today, which is pretty impressive that it's lasted so many years. And then here is the imperial crown, which was not actually, they call it the crown of Charlemagne, but it wasn't actually for Charlemagne. It was for his one of his successors, Otto I. So it was decorated with 144 precious stones. It was made out of 22-karat gold, and it is presently located at the Imperial Treasury, or the Schatzkammer, in Vienna, ever since World War II. These gems are actually, I don't know how to explain it very well, but they're held so that both sides of the gem can let light go through it. So like if the light was shining on top of the crown, it would look like the light was coming out of the gems, which is pretty impressive. And then also, this is a guy, an American soldier wearing the crown in 1945 after he had been captured by the Americans, which is very impressive, I guess, for this guy. His name was reputedly, even though there's no real confirming or denying this, his name was allegedly Sergeant Ivan Babcock, and the crown was being kept in a cave in Siegen, Germany by the Nazis. They were keeping it in a cave. However, this is probably not the original. It was probably a replica made in 1915 for Kaiser Wilhelm II. But now we need to talk about the Treaty of Verdun, which is when the Frankish kingdom had to be split up because it was getting too large to govern. So Charlemagne divided the empire between his 3 sons, who all of them succeeded him technically because of the Germanic custom of divisible inheritance. He divided up the inheritance so that all 3 of his sons would get something instead of giving his entire kingdom over to one son.
When was this, Con?
Well, 843.
Okay.
Sorry. West Francia, or France, was given over to Charles the Bald. And then the middle part between the east and west Francia was called Lotharingia because it was given to Lothair, who was one of Charlemagne's sons. And then also he got Italy too. He got the Frankish Italy. And then his 3rd son was named Louis the German, and because he received the German territories. And then also to the east there were a collection of states which were not part of the Frankish Empire, but they were tributary states. They paid tribute to the king of Francia, and this included Bohemia, as was the largest of the tributary states. But over the centuries, Lotharingia would be contested by France and well, really not Germany. The Holy Roman Empire would contest each other for getting pieces of Lotharingia, and eventually it would cease to exist except for Italy, and then Italy would fall away from imperial authority over the centuries until essentially it was independent. So now we're going to talk about the actual way that Germany was divided according to this. So it was divided up into a collection of duchies. These are called the stem duchies. And so in the center we have Saxony was one of the largest ones. Franconia, Thuringia, Bavaria, Bohemia, and Moravia were included as part of this. Burgundy was a kingdom, and it was part of Lotharingia until Germany had captured it in a war. And the Netherlands and what would eventually become Belgium were also included. So this kingdom comprised the majority of the lands of the Holy Roman Empire, and it contained the electoral lands, which were lands whose rulers would vote on who would become the next emperor, because the emperor was not a hereditary position, it was elected. But it was not elected in the way that we would understand election as Americans. It was a very limited franchise, only about 8 people. So this included the Bishop of Cologne, Mainz, and Trier, the Lords of Saxony, Brandenburg, and the County Palatine of the Rhine. Brandenburg, which is here, but it wouldn't develop fully until a couple centuries later, and then also Bohemia got a vote in the election. So there were 3 bishops who were allowed to participate in the election, and then the rest of them were lords. Eventually this would start to break down over the centuries, and all of these the stem duchies would collapse and fall apart into the separate lordships that would pretty much define Germany until 1871.
Connor, how does this compare to what they split up Charlemagne's empire into, the 3 you were showing before?
So
this came after, or this?
This is a little bit after Charlemagne's empire. So as you can see, this is what was considered to be the Kingdom of Germany in 843, and then it had expanded as a result of war and deals between the various rulers of Lotharingia, West Francia, and East Francia.
So what was that time frame? How long between what you showed on the last slide?
So I think this is around the 900s. So this is about 1 or 2 centuries after. So now we're going to talk about Italy, which has become very fragmented. So the Kingdom of Italy was considered to be only about the northern half of Italy. Also, if it's completely unrelated to the Kingdom of Italy that arose in the 19th century in 1861. The Imperial Kingdom of Italy is completely different from the one that was organized by the Kingdom of Sardinia. Basically, it all fell apart very quickly, mostly because the king lived up here in the Kingdom of Germany and lived across the Alps, so his authority over Italy was very limited. The Papal States were part of a donation that Charlemagne had given over to the Pope. He donated lands to the Pope to create the Papal States, which would endure until 1871, when Italy was attempting to unify itself. They invaded the Papal States. But basically, as a result of the loose authority over Italy, it fragmented quickly into Venice, Milan, all of the city-states that Italy had been so famous for had come about as a result of this fragmentation. So now we need to talk about Otto the Great. And he lived from 23rd November 912 to 7th of May 973. And he was the son of King Henry the Fowler, who was very famous in his own right. But I can't cover all of these guys because that would take me quite a bit. But he's very famous for attempting to centralize the Kingdom of Germany and unite the German people into a unified state. So how he accomplished this is that he appointed his family members to become the dukes of the various duchies that constituted the Kingdom of Germany at the time, as seen on this map. He defeated the Magyars, or the Hungarians. The Hungarians were coming into Europe at this time, and because they were not converted to Christianity and they hadn't settled down yet, they were a society that relied on raiding people. So the defense against the Hungarians was very much a priority of Otto the Great. In order to improve relations with the Byzantine Empire, he did the thing that Charlemagne tried to do. He married his son Otto II to a Byzantine princess named Theophanu. This also didn't really work out, mostly due to the Byzantines not recognizing the Frankish claim to the Roman Empire. So it was ultimately in vain. They did not recognize the Frankish claim to the Roman Empire. He was crowned as the emperor at Aachen Cathedral in 936, which cemented his rulership over Western Europe. He basically just kind of did the thing that every early medieval ruler did. He went at war with all of his neighbors, especially the Slavs who were attempting to invade Germany at this time. There were a lot of Eastern Slavic tribes moving into Germany. Sorry. And also, his rule resulted in the Ottonian Renaissance, which was when architecture and literature and art had started flourishing in the Frankish realm as a result of his rule. And also, he was trying to exert more authority over Italy, which was busy fragmenting and falling apart, as we had discussed previously. But that didn't really work out, and Italy eventually became almost totally independent of Germany. He died of a fever when he was 60 years old, and he was immediately succeeded by his son Otto II. Also, he was the guy who the crown that we mentioned earlier had been made for. The crown was definitely not for Charlemagne. It's not old enough.
What kind of art did they do?
Mostly it was illuminated manuscripts, books. They made illustrations in the margins of pages and things, and put gold leaf onto the pages. It was very richly decorated.
What was the Dark Ages, Connor, versus this? Is
This is considered to be the Dark Ages, which is really kind of a historical misnomer, in my opinion, because there was still quite a bit of things happening. It's just that as a result of 19th century historiography being hostile to the post-Roman era as a result of quite a bit of many factors, but mostly as a result of the Protestant Reformation trying to paint. It's really an English thing. It's not really a continental European thing, but in England, during the Reformation, they tried to paint Catholic times in England as somehow backward or less intelligent compared to the Reformation onwards. But in continental Europe, they didn't really have a Dark Age. It's really a product of 19th century biased historiography. Anyway, and then we need to talk about the Crusades, which is a thing that started to happen. The Muslim encroachment on Eastern Christendom, a lot of people said that, like,
what year?
The years 1000 onward, really, is when the Muslim invasion of the Middle East in the Byzantine Empire had really started to pick up. So the Byzantine Empire, even though they had almost entirely split from the Pope's authority. They asked for help from the Pope. They said, "Hey, you Westerners, please come help us. We are under siege by the Turks." The Pope, whose name was Pope Urban II, he made a speech at the Council of Clermont, which was a gathering of bishops and church officials, urging Christian warriors to journey east and liberate the Eastern Christians from their Muslim conquerors. So Turks who were migrating in from Central Asia had already taken over the eastern half of the Anatolian Peninsula, which is where Turkey is today. And then also they had invaded the entire Middle East, which used to be under the Greeks. And then also there were reports that Christians were being abused in the Holy Land, that there were pilgrims who were traveling to the Middle East who they let bandits attack them freely because the Muslim forces didn't really care about them. They're just like, if bandits are going to attack them, let them do it. So this outraged people in the West. So the Crusaders passed through Europe on their way to the Holy Land to answer the call of the Pope. And they picked up a lot of peasants along the way who thought that the crusade would be really fun, I guess. I don't know, they thought it would be a nice vacation from working for their lords. And however, they didn't really have any weapons, so by the time they had arrived in Anatolia, in the Middle East, they were pretty much slaughtered by the bushel by the Turks, which was very much not a good thing. And there were quite a few of the lords of Western Europe who were joining the Crusades. So there was Godfrey of Bouillon, Urban II, who had called the crusade, Peter the Hermit, who is this guy. He was a friar who got a lot of people together for the crusade early on too. Before a lot of the lords of Western Europe had started moving for the crusade, Peter the Hermit was already gathering people for the crusade. Bohemond of Taranto, Raymond IV of Toulouse, Adhemar of Le Robert Curthose, who was English, Stephen of Blois, who was French, Hugh of Vermandois, and Robert II of Flanders, who was a German. But basically, a lot of these very big-time lords of Western Europe who had quite a bit of holdings they could draw on, and a lot of knights who served them said that we're going to the Holy Land to liberate the Christians. The First Crusade was incredibly successful. They had driven out a lot of the Turkish invaders and helped the Byzantine Empire reconquer some territory.
So the Christians then were Orthodox.
The Greeks were Orthodox, and the Europeans of the West were Catholic.
So they were not the same religion.
There's a lot of complicated relationships between the two. The Greek Christians of the East had basically started to completely ignore the Pope and declare themselves as separate. But this time they saw that the Pope probably had the answer for their problem, so they went to go and ask him. And then, of course, they got a resounding yes. After the First Crusade, they established the Kingdom of Jerusalem, and they put Godfrey of Bouillon to become the first king of Jerusalem. The Christians were safe, and the Muslim civilians actually living in the Holy Land were not disturbed by the Christians. They let them continue on living as before. Also they created some other states, such as the Principality of Antioch and the counties of Tripoli and Edessa, were the Crusader states. They're kind of referred to collectively as the Crusader states. But the Kingdom of Jerusalem was the main one, which of course its capital was in Jerusalem.
Was Tripoli in Libya?
Not Tripoli in Libya. Tripoli is also, there's two cities called Tripoli. There's one of them in the Middle East. Come on, you just keep reusing names, guys. Come on. But in 1100, this is what Europe looked like. Right here, the German realm has kind of expanded. It's basically swallowed all of Lotharingia, and the King of Italy is all under the Emperor. And then the King of France is kind of just in the west here. A lot of the other European states have kind of formed at this point. There's Hungary has formed itself as an independent kingdom. The Byzantine Empire is down here. Russia is, like I did my Russian presentation earlier, we talked about the Russian principalities being independent states. Poland and some of the other smaller states had all formed. The map of Europe at this time is quite different from what is today. And also, Serbia exists, but it's very far to the west. A lot of what would have been considered then to be Serbia is actually in Croatia today. It was kind of, the Balkans were a very fluid kind of area. Borders were changing back and forth all the time. A lot of the borders on this map are just our best guess. There wasn't really very good maps of whose lands were what. It was very informal. Sorry. So now we need to talk about the later Crusades. So the later Crusades became not as effective. The Muslim response became a lot more serious. They mustered quite a bit more troops, and initially they underestimated the threat that the Crusaders were posing to them. And when they had underestimated them, they got defeated. But then they realized that the Crusaders were quite a bit more of a threat than they originally realized. So Jerusalem fell after the Second Crusade, and Richard the Lionheart of England, he called for a third crusade to try and retrieve it, but he wasn't successful. So also the emperor of Germany, his name was Frederick Barbarossa. We mentioned him earlier. He died on his way to the Holy Land in a boat. He was going to join the Third Crusade with Richard the Lionheart, but his forces went down on the boat that they were traveling over on. So he's remembered as the reinforcements that never arrived. And perhaps if he had arrived, they could have won the Third Crusade. But the Crusaders kept losing more and more land, and then eventually the Fourth Crusade happened, and that was a complete disaster. And I could go into that, but it's very complicated. But basically, what happened during the Fourth Crusade is that the Crusaders needed a fleet to get over to the Holy Land, and Venice said, oh yes, we will build you a fleet, but pay us a lot of money. Crusaders were like, we don't have the money. And then Venice said, like, okay, well, if you help us attack the Byzantine Empire, we will build the ships for you. And then the Crusaders said, sure. And that's the Fourth Crusade, is they went and attacked Christians instead of Muslims.
Connor, in the Third Crusade, who was the leader of the Muslims?
Saladin. He was a leader of Egypt, and he was quite a famous lord in his own right.
He was kind of why they didn't succeed, right?
Saladin was pretty much the main reason they didn't succeed in the Third Crusade, is because he was very powerful. He had quite a bit of forces at his disposal, and he was very adept at leading them.
How many crusaders
Well, that really depends on who you're asking, because there were some later on conflicts which were called crusades, but they're not considered to be part of the crusades. There were, for example, in the 1500s, there were a lot of crusades called by the Pope against the Ottomans, the Ottoman Empire, but those typically aren't included as part of the main crusades. There's really 4 of them, the main ones. After the Fourth Crusade, the whole thing kind of just fell apart and they gave up. And then there were some isolated incidents where European monarchs would attack the Holy Land or North Africa mostly, and call that a crusade. The King Louis IX of France, for example, he led his own crusade against the North African Muslim states, and that was in the 13 or 1400s. But mostly the crusades had all ended by 1291.
That was, the last one was, where did they invade? There's a famous city, right? Acre?
Oh, Accra. Okay, so the Crusaders' last fortress, their last place that they controlled, was a city called Accra, which is on the west coast of Middle East. There's a picture. This picture right here is actually the siege of Accra. the Crusaders are under attack by the Muslims. So they had them completely surrounded, and eventually, because of the overwhelming force of the Muslims, the Crusaders had to pull out and leave. And the siege of Acre ended in 1291, and that's considered to be the end date of the Crusades. But, as I said, there were some later conflicts which people would call crusades that aren't considered as part of the original ones. So there's the Northern Crusades, which the reason why we're talking about this is because it relates to Germany. So there was a group of knights called the Teutonic Order, and they were founded in 1190 in Jerusalem. Their order was originally called the Brothers of St. Mary in the, I can't remember what it's called, but the German Brothers of St. Mary in the Hospital of Jerusalem, or whatever. They had a very long name, but they just shortened it down to the Teutonic Knights. And their order was mainly composed of people from Germany. So they started really kind of later on in the Crusades. They didn't really get involved in the Crusades in the Middle East as much as they did as these ones. They became aware. So after the Crusades ended in the West, in the East, in 1291, they refocused their crusading efforts to a place called Prussia, which was the last stronghold of paganism in Europe. So this is the last group of Europeans who had not been converted to Christianity, because they were very isolated, far away from main centers of civilization in Europe. So the two main groups were the Baltic people and then the Lithuanians. And the Crusades, they happen against these groups, and when the Teutonic Order comes in, they set up a special kind of state called the Ordensstaat, which is the order state. So the Grand Master of the Teutonic Order was the ruler of the state. And the brothers, members of the Teutonic Order, served as members of the government. So eventually, the Lithuanians adopted Christianity, like they were mostly converted around the 1300s, I believe. And the Teutonic Order started to come into conflict with the Russians. There's a city called Novgorod in Russia, and their ruler, he had a conflict with the Teutonic Order. And in 1242, there was a famous battle on a frozen lake in this area here. And the Russians won that battle because the Teutonic Knights were standing on the ice, and the ice broke, and they all fell into the water, and they froze to death. And that's how Novgorod won the war against the Teutonic Knights. And after that battle, everything kind of just started to fall apart for them, and their state declined massively. They lost a lot of territory, and they became a puppet state of Poland.
Oh.
Yeah.
This was the same time as the Third and Fourth Crusades were going on in the Middle East, right?
It's pretty much right after that. They started doing this pretty soon after the Crusades in the Middle East had ended. So, and the Prince of Novgorod became very famous as a result of his victory over the Teutonic Knights. And his name was Alexander Nevsky, and I think I mentioned him in my Russia presentation. So these are what Teutonic Knights looked like. They wore a all-white surcoat and mantle over their armor, which was chainmail armor, and they wore a great helm or a bucket helmet. They also they had a lot of members of the order who were not actually knights. They were called sergeants, which the word sergeant is derived from servant. Or I think the word servant comes from sergeant anyway. They were considered to be non-noble members of the Teutonic Order, so they didn't have the full privileges that a knightly brother would have had. And they pretty much served as the foot soldiers of the Teutonic Order. Because in order to become a member of the Teutonic Order, you had to be a knight. You had to have already been created as a knight by a lord. And you had to get a dispensation from your lord to be able to join the Teutonic Knights, because joining the Teutonic Knights would mean that you had to give up your service to your lord to go and join the order and become a crusader. So there was not very many knights that were a member. The Teutonic Order mostly consisted of people like this and not knights. Knights were probably only about 5% of the organization. And then they also had people who were monks. They just had people who lived as lay brothers in monasteries. And then also they had a lot of nuns who were considered to be part of the Teutonic Order also. So knights were the leaders of the organization, but they did not constitute the majority. And then this is a painting of the aftermath of the battle, obviously not a contemporaneous one. This one was made in 1800s. But this guy right here, that's supposed to be Alexander Nevsky. And the people of Novgorod are celebrating their victory. And then over here on the left side, you have some Teutonic Knights who've been taken prisoner by Alexander Nevsky. And this battle would become very famous for Russians. Russians would consider this to be kind of, they like to call back to it a lot, especially during World War II when they were fighting Germany during World War II. They made a propaganda movie called Alexander Nevsky, which was about the battle on the ice. And they also it's very famous for the Russians, and then for the Germans it's very famous as a defeat, which is kind of the story of European history. Everyone else's success is somebody else's failure.
One is louder, one is...
But it's a battle that's remembered very differently, depending on who you ask. And that's the end of the presentation. So, do you have any questions?
Where do the Knights Templar come in there?
Oh, so the Knights Templar, they're another Crusader order, and they were organized pretty similarly to the Teutonic Knights, but I didn't mention the Knights Templar because they're mostly a French thing, or French and English. Comprised the majority of the members of the Knights Templar.
But they were the same idea.
They were the same idea. Basically, the idea of the religious knighthood. They were trying to combine the life of a monk with a warrior because they needed the armed defense of Christianity at the time against the Muslim encroachment on the Christian East.
Describe as hospitaliers.
Oh, yes. So another order was the Knights Hospitaller, who were actually the original of the knightly orders. Because they were founded before the Crusades, actually. Like right before, pretty much soon before the Pope Urban II had declared the Crusades. They had been around for like 2 decades or so. Because everybody kind of already knew that there was going to be a conflict between the Middle East and Europe at this time. So people were getting ready. And the Knights Hospitaller were also founded as primarily as a group that would, do what it says on the tin. They ran hospitals for pilgrims in the Middle East. They were part of combat. They were knights after all, but unlike the Teutonic Order, whose mission was almost exclusively combat, and then the Knights Templar, who their group was also kind of focused on banking, really, because what they did was
The creation and protection of temples was supposed to be.
yes, they were founded to defend the temple, or what was left of the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem.
Oh.
That's where their headquarters were formerly, was the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. But the Knights Templar, they did banking, and basically what that was for pilgrims who had money. They wanted to be able to take their money with them to the Middle East, but it was very dangerous. They could get robbed. So what they did was they went to the Knights Templar, and they basically did a check. It was like a check. They wrote a check, and they said this much money, and they had the person's name on it, and you had to be able, and you were able to take it to the Templars, one of their chapter houses in the Middle East, and get your money there, withdraw it, which was pretty much revolutionary, and they made a lot of money doing this, because they got to take a little bit of money for offering that service. Anyway, but the knightly orders, there was quite a few of them, but they all were kind of created for the purpose of the Crusades. And then after the Crusades, they kind of just declined. Especially after the fall of the Knights Templar, which was an elaborate conspiracy by the groups who owed them money. The King of France owed them money, some churchmen owed them money. A lot of people ended up becoming debtors to the Knights Templar. And so they developed an elaborate conspiracy where they would accuse the Knights Templar of devil worship and all of this, and then have them be taken down for that, so they wouldn't owe them any money anymore.
What about the Illuminati?
I don't know. There's a lot of conspiracy theories about the Knights Templar not being a secret society that still exists and all of that.
That was created by these debtors. They came up with this idea that the Templars were actually Satanists that followed the Illuminati. And then when they threw them down, then they dissolved their debts so they didn't have to pay them because they owed them millions and millions of dollars, right? So
Yeah, they owed them what would today be millions and millions of dollars in gold. You know, the Knights Templar are basically, yes, mother? You have a question?
The lady in the front row has a question.
Do you have a question?
Me?
Yeah. Oh,
I have one.
yes.
When we were in, Portugal and Spain, in areas where the Muslims had
Mhm.
taken over,
Yep.
we were told that although they didn't approve of showing a person,
Mm-hmm.
they covered the Christian symbols
They did.
with
Yeah.
Muslim, but they didn't destroy them.
No,
So when the Christians came
they
back,
pulled
they
it
were
down
able
and
to read.
yeah. During the time of Muslim domination in Spain, which didn't end until 1492, they didn't force out the Muslims all the way until 1492. A lot of when the Muslims had taken over Spain, they went into churches and they converted them into mosques, and they covered up a lot of the Christian art on the walls with plaster. And when the Spanish had come back in and driven out the Muslims, they went into these churches that had been converted into mosques, and they realized that all of the stuff was still there, it was just covered up, and they pulled it down, and then they realized that the church was still there the whole time. Yeah. Any other questions?
What are you gonna do the next part two?
Oh, well, 2 weeks from now.
What years will be part 2?
Well, I think I would probably go from now until, where we ended here, 1241, until 1871. I know that's quite a bit of a jump, but I tend to make this a 3-parter, so.
So will you go to World War I or will you come short?
I'm gonna go until 1871, which is when modern Germany kind of got united by Bismarck.
Do you have this in a form where you could get a copy of and read?
Well, there is quite a few books about the history of Germany.
Myself, you can have a copy of your presentation.
Oh, the presentation? Well,
Sure.
I can print out some copies and bring them, I
We
guess.
can email them to the staff.
Oh yeah, I can do that too. All right. Well, if anyone else has any questions?
Thank you.
Well, yeah. Thank you for having me.
Thank you both for coming.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Appreciate it, thank you for coming.